In early 1989, Akira Kurosawa accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Academy Awards in Hollywood. He was praised by the younger generation of Western filmmakers, Francis Coppola, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, William Friedkin and more, who affectionately called him the Sensei of cinema. Why was Kurosawa revered so in the West, in a way unknown to any Japanese artist, before or since? At school, Kurosawa was introduced to the fine arts through his teacher Chichikawa. It was during this time that Kurosawa would be influenced by the work of Van Gogh, Cézanne and Gauguin. When Kurosawa became a film director, he burned all his paintings. This was informed by a Japanese proverb, "If you chase 2 rabbits, you may not catch even one." Kurosawa may have given up painting for film, but he retained his artistic sensibility and temperament. In Drunken Angel, Kurosawa is heavily influenced by the 16th to 18th century Baroque artistic style. He utilises the use of light and shadow. Kurosawa also infused Seven Samurai with the extreme physical brutality and finality that can be seen in the Baroque style. Kurosawa uses motion within stillness in Seven Samurai. First, stillness. Then words. Silence. A violent stroke to the chest. Kurosawa's earlier films were obviously in black and white, yet Van Gogh was still a major influence, known for his vivid use of colours. Kurosawa saw the rich use of black and white in Van Gogh's coloured paintings. It wasn't until Dodes'Caden in 1970 that Kurosawa used colour in his films. This marked the latter stage in the director's artistic career, where he unleashed his painterly style. In the film Dreams, he finally merges 2 worlds, painting and cinema.
A scene that looks like a painting does not make a painting. If you take the time and look closely, all of nature has its own beauty. And when that natural beauty is there, I just lose myself in it. And then, as if it's in a dream, the scene just paints itself for me. Yes, I consume this natural setting. I devour it completely and whole. And then when I'm through, the picture appears before me complete.
We can further analyse Kurosawa's frames to determine the effect, or desired effect, the composition of his shots had on the audience. Unlike many filmmakers of the time, who seemed to be somewhat hindered by the physical limits of the frame, Kurosawa worked organically with a 4:3 aspect ratio and played to the format's strengths, instead of its weaknesses. If you examine the westerns coming from Hollywood at the time, and before, also before the advent of cinemascope or an equivalent, in the physical conflicts, one of the most obvious differences is the use of a weapon. In the westerns, the fighters use guns and bows, long-range attack methods, as it is implied that the characters would have done in real life. It is difficult to film a complicated action scene with long-range weaponry on a screen so narrow and tall. The director and cinematographer have a few choices. 1. Film the whole scene in an extreme wide shot, showing both the duelists in simultaneous action, but ultimately leaving a lot of unwanted background space and sacrificing the detail of the actors' bodies and actions. 2. Painstakingly alter the image through the use of effects like the iris demonstrated in D.W. Griffith's Broken Blossoms to simulate a widescreen. This would focus attention on the actors, but they would still be small and under-detailed. 3. Shoot with a combination of deep focused 2 shots and cuts to both sides of the action, offering detail on both sides of the conflict and an economic use of the film space. The problem here is that the 2 sides are very detached from one another. There is less of a sense of danger, as we rarely see the protagonist and antagonist at the same time. Most Western filmmakers opted for this approach. Kurosawa realised that it can be of great importance that both characters be seen simultaneously. In the battle scenes from Rashomon, the 4:3 aspect ratio suitably reflects the proximity of the duelists, and amplifies the fear that they both feel being in such close contact with death. Within such a small frame, there is nowhere to run. If this sequence was widened, even in a superficial manner, does the sense of danger feel as tense? Is the constant threat of death or decapitation still present? The shape of the frame dictates also the interrogation scenes, when the camera positions us, the viewer, in the role of investigator. Firstly by having the suspect face his head on, but also in the low framing and aspect ratio, which simulates a kneeling stance, associated with Japan. Further analysing shots, we see that the backgrounds are plain, uncomplicated, so that we are not distracted from the character's testimony. Also, the other suspects are kept in the frame, in the background. Kurosawa does this so that we do not forget their stories, and try to piece the truth together ourselves. As Kikori, the woodcutter, walks through the forest, there are many fast, jolting cuts around his position. There is no master or establishing shot, and therefore no way for the viewer to completely understand where they are being led. The confusion continues in the later stories, of the bandit leading the samurai and his wife through the forest to a hidden plain. Compare these disorienting images to the static views of both those bookending shots in the ruin and those in the police station. These are much easier to understand because they are unquestionable in the eyes of the audience. Kurosawa is reinforcing the narrative with the cinematography and editing by jumbling up the unreliable accounts and implying that they are unclear in the heads of the storytellers, that they are liars. He is leaving clues to be revealed later on that the story being told may not be entirely genuine. The only truths are shown to us directly, with little confusion or manipulation. Of all the things that define Japanese nationality, Kurosawa stated that no theatre defined it best. Its degree of compression, its symbolism, subtlety, and its ability to engage a contest between audience and performer which seemed to involve the entire Japanese cultural heritage made it a truly unique Japanese art form for Kurosawa. While the West took its drama from the psychology and circumstances of characters, Kurosawa believed the No form drew its emotion and style of performance from the No mask, where the performer becomes the character whom the mask represents. In Throne of Blood, Kurosawa blends the No with Shakespeare. The film's portrayal of Asagi, the Lady Macbeth character played by Isuzu Yamada, is particularly evident of the No influence. Her character is the most limited and confined, yet the most driven and evil, moving with specificity from heel to toe much like the No actor. Kurosawa frames Yamada's face and uses makeup in such a way that the No ghost mask is evocative. This No ghostliness is further evoked by Asagi's husky and unintonated voice, the dragging sound of her kimono, the clatter of the spinning wheel, and the rustlings of the reed hut, all further emphasise the influence of No to a Japanese audience. In Ran, Kurosawa once again blends No with Shakespeare. The actors, their costumes, and their use of costumes are obvious examples of the No influence. They are used not only to dramatically gesture, but even as a means to further incorporate Japanese custom into the film. Whenever he was asked what his best film was, Kurosawa would always reply, "The next one." Later the reply was simply Ran, a film he began writing 10 years before shooting began, and took a further 2 years to storyboard. This film made full use of colour in its vivid and visceral battle scenes, but Kurosawa also used colour to symbolise. The three brothers in Ran represent different values, and these are reflected in their costume. Taro, the eldest, wears yellow, a sacred colour holding him in reverence above his brothers, but yellow is also the Japanese colour for treachery, as he betrays his father and in turn is betrayed himself. Jiro, the middle brother, wears red, the colour of passion and danger, representing his bloodlust and hot-headedness that drives his quest for power. The red smoke of the burning castle and the blood flowing through the streets is a representation of Jiro's dominance. The youngest brother, Saburo, wears blue, the Japanese colour of loyalty and fidelity. Saburo is the only brother that stays true to his father, Hidetoro, taking his small army to protect him. Lord Hidetoro wears white, the Japanese colour of mourning, and when he loses his power and his sons, he becomes a ghastly ghost-like figure, death itself in the film. At the age of 73, and having himself survived a suicide attempt, Kurosawa uses Hidetoro as an allegory of himself. Ran explores the theme of legacy. What is Hidetoro leaving the world when he dies? Having spent so long in the film, Kurosawa was very aware of what he wanted to be his legacy. Throughout the film, the subject of Hidetoro's previous misdeeds and murders haunt him, but what is considered the worst crime in the film is the murder of Jiro's wife, so that he can marry his brother's wife. Sadly, during filming, Kurosawa's wife died. Closing production for one day to mourn, Kurosawa continued on with the film. Kurosawa shows the darker side of mankind in Ran, showing the violence and treachery. The blackness of the buildings and the smoke in the battle scene reflects the despair and depression Kurosawa was feeling, and the blood flowing down the streets represents all the violence in the world. A bitter end to a film Kurosawa considered one of his best. When the aged director accepted his honorary Oscar years later, he commented that he did not yet understand the true meaning of film. However, generations of audiences fondly remember and discover Akira Kurosawa, and find for themselves just what made him the Sensei of cinema.